married a father who would basically hold all the necessities and properties under their name, and they lived off that, right? Today, it's not that in the same case anymore. Women have the rights to do so, but back then it wasn't that. And because her husband had passed away, she now faced poverty, extortion, and social marginalization, the absence of structural support from the society, right? She didn't have that. Another thing, too, is that because she didn't have anything, her husband, who had passed away, the debts also then carried on into her. And because she didn't have means to pay for it, the only way to be able to pay it off was to take some collateral to pay off the debt. And in her case, it was her children. So her issue was not only a financial issue, it was a family issue as well. She was in debt, she had lost her husband, and now was about to lose her children. So that's a huge, heavy burden to carry. Now, the third part, and as I was mentioning here, Elijah being the prophet, his role was not only just to be a middleman between him and God, he was also sort of like a social worker of sorts, to deal with the issues of the people. Now, it doesn't say much on what is going on behind the scenes, but I would assume that this woman coming to Elijah was in a moment of desperation. I would assume she had tried everything already to figure out her issue, but because the struggle that she was facing, not having an identity without her husband, she was already struggling, and now she was at rock bottom. And now she's just asking for some sort of help, some sort of way. And so Elisha, being the man of God, helps. Second verse of chapter 4 continues and says, Elisha replies to her and says, "How can I help? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" "Your servant has nothing there at all," she says, "except a small jar of olive oil." Elisha said, Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask just a few." And that's the verse that we read earlier. The story continues in verse 4. It says, "Then go inside the house, shut the door behind you, and you and your sons, pour the oil into all the jars, and each is filled, and put it to one side." She left him, shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. We'll pause there for now, and we'll get into it a little bit more. But I wanted us to notice one thing here. Two things, but one thing. The first part, Elisha asks her, "How can I help you?" And without even recognizing the issue, he immediately says something that I'm not sure you're starting to see, but he says, "What do you have in your house?" Oftentimes for many of us, when we struggle, we go to God in moments of desperation. Especially when we hit rock bottom, right? We go there and we go like, "God, I need your help. I'm struggling here. I'm dealing with this. I don't know what to do." And sometimes when we go to God, we're expecting an immediate answer. Like, "God, I'm dealing with emotional baggage. Remove this from me." Right? We already have the answer. "Oh God, I'm dealing with financial issues. Give me this job," or "Give me this amount of money." We have our ideas of what we want to fulfill our request. But I like what Elijah says here, and I feel like this is what God also says to his people. He goes, "What is inside your house? What is in your inventory?" Because you see, sometimes God wants to bless us in ways that only He understands, but He likes to do it in a way where once we see His hand in work, we cannot deny it is Him. And I say this because sometimes our blessing is based on our inventory, and you see this in the Bible. For example, Moses. When God called him to lead the people of Israel, what did He tell Moses in front of in the burning bush? "What is in your hand?" Moses, who at the time went from a prince to a shepherd, was holding a rod. And because he was holding this rod, it was in his hand. And God said, what is in your hand? Cast it out. And he showed a miracle based on the inventory of Moses. David killed Goliath with whatever was on his hand. It wasn't the armor that the king put on him. It was a sling and a few rocks that he collected from the creek. The Sermon on the Mount, one of my favorite sermons. For those of you who don't know, it's the sermon where Jesus feeds thousands and thousands of people with fish and a few loaves of bread. What is in your inventory? This is an important part in our Christian walk with God, to recognize what's in our inventory, because it does one thing to us. It recognizes who we are on the inside. And for many of us, that's a humbling knowledge to know. Because who we are on the inside, without God, is a scary place. Who we are on the inside without God is a place that I'm sure the person next to you doesn't even know about. Because that is where all of our struggles, all of our doubts, our fears, our addictions, our worries, our anxiety is hidden. Because when we show that in public, we might be looked upon in a negative way. So we keep that deep inside. But when God comes into our lives after we've asked for a blessing, He tells us what's inside, not because He wants to shame us, but He's trying to show us that He can use whatever we choose to let go. In the case of the widow, she didn't have much. In fact, she admits she didn't have much. When Elisha had asked, "What's in your house?" She said nothing other than this small jar of olive oil. This is the part that really got me, was that once we recognize the inventory, God tells us, let it go. In the case of this woman, Elisha tells her, pour out, get some jars, go to your neighbors, ask them for all the jars that they have, and pour out the little oil you have. For those who may not understand what's going on, I would assume you would go, that's kind of crazy. Why would I, one, give away the only thing I have left? And two, how is the little thing I have going to fill all the jars that I've collected? That doesn't make sense. And for many of us, that doubt and fear, that worry, the anxiety of letting go prevents us from experiencing the blessing that's about to happen. You see, the story goes, she listens. She doesn't even question. It doesn't say she questioned. She walked in to her room with her sons after collecting all the jars, closed the door behind them, and started pouring. Now, there's a significance about the door closing. I don't know if you've caught it yet. But sometimes miracles happen not in public. Sometimes the miracles that are meant for us happens behind closed doors. Because it's not meant to be a public spectacle. It's meant to be a personal testimony. So that we have nothing to brag, right? That we have nothing to brag that, oh, this wasn't just me, like, oh, I did that, It was because God did something. And so behind closed doors, miracles occur. But it only comes when we choose to let go of the little things that we're holding on to. And we see here, as we continue on the story, in verse 6, it says, when all the jars were full, she said to her son, bring me another one. And he replied, there is not a jar left. Then the oil stopped flowing. See, friends, I would assume, okay, I just like using my imagination, and feel free to use it with me. When we're out, like let's say we're in their shoes and we're out collecting jars, we're trying to get as much as we can. We go through neighbors, and like it's different back then compared to now, where back then it was a very communal society. So I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you walk to your neighbor and you're like, hey, can I get a cup of sugar? Like that, but to a whole nother level, where it's like they just want to help each other out. And so I would assume that when the children and her went out to go collect jars, friends were really excited. Like, here, take it, go ahead, I don't need it. And once that happens, right, like behind closed doors, I can imagine the excitement that the kids are seeing as they're pouring this little small cup